Just to kind of recap so that everyone would know where we're at, is that last Saturday after the state funeral, a motion then was to rise from the committee of the whole, and that it took us back to the second reading file. And on the second reading file is that there were two bills that had met then the requirements in which there is a request for a waiver of the public hearing, which was 311 and 315. Additionally, two other bills after those were placed on the agenda, Bill 222 and Bill 266. So now then, the second reading, I'd like to recognize Senator Frank Ogden on Bill number 311-32.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of our colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to place Bill number 311-32 on the agenda. Just for purposes of the public, first and foremost, Madam Speaker, you did sign off on the waiving of the requirement for the public hearing, and I just want to explain and thank the good senator, my colleague from Sinahanya, Senator Duenas, for his endorsement of requesting that in fact we proceed with Bill number 311-32 without a public hearing. And Madam Speaker, I bring this up only because we have in the past been asked or urged and encouraged to go through the public hearing process so that we can receive comments from the community.
Before
I proceed, yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, for that reminder.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to move for the placement of Bill number 311-32 LS as introduced in the third reading with discussion, please.
Yes, please proceed, Senator.
And just so that I don't forget, and I return back to my comments, Madam Speaker, I'd like to move for the addition of Senator Chris Trainers, Senator Tommy Morrison, and Senator Tina Barnes as the subsequent sponsors of this proposal.
On that motion, no objections or...
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, going back again to one of the comments that I wanted to share was to our community, Bill number 311-32 is proceeding, and with the concurrence of the members of this body and also with your assistance, Madam Speaker, of waiving the public hearing. And traditionally, we should not move in that direction, recognizing that the public should always be involved in some of the discussions as it applies to legislation that would affect them. But Madam Speaker, if you recall back in June of last year, there was legislation that was passed, which is now Public Law 32-60, that created a particular fund that is referenced in this legislation. And this act reads, an act relative to appropriating the funds available in the Limited Gaming Fund in fiscal year 13 and 14 in accordance with Public Law 32-60. Madam Speaker, I was instructed during the course of a discussion with another legislation that is in the third reading that there are resources, there are funds in excess of $1 million in this particular account, but because language contained in Public Law 32-60 does not provide for the direct appropriation to the Mayor's Council as required by law, that direct appropriation to the Department of Parks and Recreation as required by law that was cited earlier, and a direct appropriation to the Department of Education. That's one of the reasons why there was a request that the waiver be granted, specifically because this is legislation that, at least from my perspective, and I'm sure that other members of this body may speak accordingly, that should have had the appropriate language so that these resources can go to the appropriate entities. So, Madam Speaker, I stand here first and foremost asking our colleagues for their support in this legislation and recognizing that when this idea came up for the introduction of Bill 311, Madam Speaker, one of our colleagues had approached me and asked if by any chance this can be entertained as a proposal in another appropriation measure that is in the third reading. Shortly after that, I had received 3 calls that afternoon from our mayors asking that in fact this measure be provided or introduced and added to that appropriation measure specifically so that they can have immediate access to those funds in that account. Madam Speaker, as a result of that conversation and that this legislation was formulated and introduced so that in fact we would have a number associated with this, the release of these funds and the appropriation of these funds, so that, like is highlighted in Public Law 32-060, it would go to the mayors of Guam, it will go to the Department of Parks and Recreation, and it will go to the Department of Education. Madam Speaker, I also want to state for the record that despite these funds being in this particular account, called the Limited Gaming Fund account, I need to emphasize that I am not endorsing the gaming component of this particular fund. I'm recognizing that there is a law in place, that there are funds in that specific account, and that we need to, as a result and consistent with the law, provide these resources and these funds to the mayors, Parks and Rec, and to the Department of Education. So I needed to state that for the record, Madam Speaker, knowing full well that this legislation would appropriate the funds that were collected and generated in fiscal year 13. As was mentioned, the law was passed in June of last year, and then also appropriate the funds that has been generated in fiscal year 14 and will be generated for the balance of the fiscal year, and give these funds to the entities that I highlighted a little earlier. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask our colleagues for their consideration and the support of this legislation. And I once again would like to thank you and our fellow colleagues, Madam Speaker, for allowing this measure to be entertained this afternoon in our session. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Just Masi, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to rise, of course, in full support of this measure, 311-32. Madam Speaker, I would like to first of all thank you for your leadership. As the retiring speaker mentioned, it was something that has been challenged protocol before, and so I thank you for your understanding and the retiring speaker's leadership as well in pushing this forward, understanding that this measure, as has been discussed, is current public law, and I appreciate his discussion in terms of, I did ask him if I could move an amendment in a bill that he had, and I respect, Madam Speaker, his position on not wanting to do that for his stated reasoning earlier, and so I appreciate his leadership in introducing the legislation and subsequent allowing for it to hit the floor now. In the retiring speaker's discussion, he mentioned the phone calls from, of course, the three mayors, because of the fact that they've been very eager. They are at the front line under limited gaming, Madam Speaker, of collecting these resources, and they're also on the front line of being asked on a daily basis, where is the progress with regard to this public law? So I have not gotten calls from three mayors. I've gotten calls from 10, 11, 12, I think all 19 mayors on this issue, Madam Speaker. So it is an account that has accumulated quite a bit of money. It will go to the public good in terms of providing opportunities for our young people to realize these sports facilities in the villages to be improved and new ones to be built, alongside Parks and Recreation's capability of doing the same, as well as Department of Education. So, Madam Speaker, once again, I would just like to also ask all of our colleagues here to please support this measure, and let's take this public law to its full capability and ensure that those monies are released as soon as this public law is passed. And I would also like to say I also really appreciate the language that was put in there that subsequent to this, once the disbursement goes out of what's in the accounts, every quarter after that, there will be those quarterly disbursements, which I think is just a wise move. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity, and I hope the rest of our colleagues can certainly lend their support to Bill 311. Sujus Masa.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the author for allowing me to be a co-sponsor of this very critical legislation, Madam Speaker. We've been on a campaign, many of us, to support our mayors, support Department of Education, their sports facilities, along with Department of Parks and Recreation and their sports facilities as well. And Madam Speaker, we thank the author for working with language to give flexibility to Public Law 32-60 to allow these funds to be available, especially right now to our mayors. We've been out there working with our mayors, looking at their facilities, and they have plans. They're ready to go. Some of them don't even require too much money, but at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, just a little bit of this money can do wonders for their communities, keeping their children off the streets, on a basketball court, a baseball field. And again, I thank the author for allowing me to be a co-sponsor. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. Certainly it recognizes that there are monies being generated from these limited gaming activities. However, there's still the need to appropriate to make sure that these monies go to its intended purposes. My support for this bill also reflects my comments in that we need to make sure that the authorization to conduct these limited gaming funds is preserved, and so much so that we preserve the funding that goes to these activities. So I move that on line 3, we strike out the words "in accordance with," and then we add in the words "pursuant to the authorization contained in Public Law 32-60. And so my added language will not only make sure that the money goes to its intended purposes, but that the authorization is strictly and implicitly limited to what this legislature decided in 32-060. And so, do I need to put that in writing, or are you okay if the new sentence reads, "Any and all funds collected in fiscal year 2013, 2014, comma, pursuant to the authorization contained in Public Law 32-060.
Thank you very much for
Thank
repeating
you.
that again. I wanted to make sure that the clerks were able to get that. So the clerks were able to get that pursuant to the authorization contained in public law? Okay. And to delete the words "in accordance with." On the amendment, no objections, so ordered. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the motion? Senator Respicio, you still have the floor.
And I'll just use the balance of my floor to announce the privilege of the floor and welcome former Vice Speaker Ted Nelson to the proceedings.
Welcome,
Thank you,
Senator.
Madam Speaker, colleagues.
So on the motion, Senator Ogden, just send it down then, or you would like to close?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to our colleagues here. Just for the information of the public, just so that we understand, I know that we in this body understand exactly where these funds are going to be allocated.
Okay, I can hear.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to all of our colleagues. I know that here in this hall, we all understand exactly how these funds are going to be allocated, and I would hate to require that our people, while they're watching this show, revert to going into the internet and accessing Public Law 32-60. So just for the information of everyone in the community, this is how the resources will be allocated. Up to 1/3 of the available balance to the Mayor's Council of Guam for the repair and construction of village recreational facilities, including community centers. Up to 1/3 of the available balance to the Department of Parks and Recreation for the repair and construction of its facilities, and up to 1/3 of the available balance to the Department of Education for the repair and construction of its sports facilities. Also, just to close out, Madam Speaker, it says funds shall not be expended for personnel costs. So I think that's very good information in terms of the public to understand that all of these resources will be invested in upgrading, in improving, and possibly constructing facilities that are needed by our mayors in the communities, by our Department of Parks and Recreation, as well as Department of Education. So, Madam Speaker, I want to thank you and thank our colleagues for not only the placement of this legislation on the agenda, but most importantly, we look forward to our support in getting these resources to those entities that were mentioned. Thank you very much, and Dr. Suzumasu.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion then to send 311-32LS to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Okay. Senator Mike Nicholas on bill number 315-32LS.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to place Bill number 315-32LS on the third reading file and to have an opportunity to speak on the measure.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill number 315-32LS is a very good bill that's been supported by all members of this body on both sides of the aisle in recognition of the need for us to make sure that we're able to continue some of the services that are offered by Sanctuary for the benefit of our young people here in the community. It wasn't too long ago, earlier in this calendar year, where we heard about some of the financial hardships that Sanctuary was going through, particularly because of the lack of federal funding, further exasperated by sequestration that cut them off from a lot of federal monies that were continuing important programs for the benefit of our young people. So two of these programs have been particularly affected. One of them is the transitional living facility for our young people who needed a place, more like a homeless shelter, more or less, for our young people. And the other are the drug and alcohol programs that Sanctuary was in charge of. This issue came to light earlier in the calendar year, and they've been, to date, negotiating at the local level to try and secure local funding to continue the programs that were adversely affected by the loss of federal funds. Unfortunately, it's come to our attention in this body that the money that Sanctuary is going to need to be able to continue those programs is going to fall far short of what they were hoping for. And as recently as April 1st of this year, Sanctuary has started cutting back on programs. They've started laying off staff, going through the motions of needing to reduce work hours for employees, and all of this translates into lower service, a lower level of service providing for our young people. And when we're talking about homeless children, when we're talking about children who need drug and alcohol prevention and rehabilitation, these are things that we cannot take very lightly. These are very, very serious issues that concern our community and transcend all philosophical differences. And so I'm extremely grateful for this entire body rallying around the need for us to give sanctuary to Sanctuary. And that amount comes to the total of $292,800 for the remainder of this fiscal year, all the way up until October 1st, so that the drug and alcohol prevention programs and the emergency youth shelter for homeless, runaway, and abused youth are able to continue. In meeting with Sanctuary, we made it very clear also that we cannot continue to subsidize the programs. They need to be able to either secure independent funding streams or re-secure federal monies. And we were very reassured from Sanctuary when they shared with us that the recent visit from a lot of the agents from the federal government that are responsible for overseeing the administration of these grants, Sanctuary was able to actually sit down with them and make a very strong case that come the beginning of the fiscal year in October, the federal government will be able to once again turn on these grants and get the support Sanctuary needs to be able to continue these programs with federal funding. But between now and October 1st, the question before this body is, are we going to let drug and alcohol rehabilitation and prevention programs, and are we going to allow for a emergency shelter for homeless, runaway, and abused youth to shut down between now and October 1st? And every single member of this body has rallied around the call for us to make sure that those programs are going to be able to continue between now and the end of the fiscal year. And so on that note, Mr. Speaker, I would like to add co-sponsors to this bill. I introduced it on my own so that we can move it, fast-track it. However, everybody has very much come to the aid of Sanctuary, and it's important that we acknowledge the unanimity that we have within this body to be able to move this forward. So in the following order, I would like to be able to have co-sponsors listed on this bill as an amendment, to include the Vice Chair of my committee, Senator Tom Atta, the Chairman of Appropriations, Senator Ben Pangilinan, Senator Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes, Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz, our Majority Leader, Senator Rory Respicio, our Chairman of the Committee on Health, Senator Rodriguez, Senator Frank Ogden, and leading the coalition on the minority side, Senator Chris Duenas has worked very closely with me. I would like him to be the next co-sponsor, along with Senator Tony Atta, the minority leader, Senator Michael Limtiaco, Senator Eileen Yamashita, Senator Brant McCready, Senator Tommy Morrison, and rounding out the pack, our faithful leader, our Speaker, Judy Wampat. And those, Mr. Speaker, make up all 15 senators of Imina Treinta y Dos, La Legislatura and Guahan, who are all rallying to the call of Sanctuary. We want to make sure that these programs are able to continue. We understand that our young people, our children, are the highest priority that we have in this community. And we're all ready and willing to step up to the plate and meet the shortfall of the federal government, the shortcoming of the federal government with respect to these programs, and bridge Sanctuary from now until October 1st. Sanctuary, and on their part, is going to understand that come the beginning of the next fiscal year, they need to do their part and make sure that the funding is going to be able to come in at the federal level to continue. So this is using a one-time funding source similar to what was identified in Bill 244 for us to be able to carry Sanctuary between now and the end of the fiscal year. And I am very grateful to my colleagues and for everybody working together to move this forward, and I very much look forward to us being able to support and give Sanctuary to Sanctuary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. First on the amendment of the co-sponsors. Any objection? On the main motion, on the bill, Senator Duenas. Senator McCready, is that your hand going up, or any other after Senator Duenas? Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to, of course, rise in full support of Bill 315-32. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to make a brief comment, first of all, to acknowledge the work of the author, of course, in this critical time. And I wanted to just acknowledge you as well for joining me several months ago to go up to Sanctuary and sit down and kind of evaluate what the current status is with their funding and also program-wise, where they're at. And so I think a lot of that work was put into also letting the chairman know what current situations exist and how they're moving to make sure there are very critical programs, including their relationship with Department of Youth Affairs, continues to move forward, and maybe some understanding that a lot of the work that they're doing, particularly in the area of substance abuse and those type of programs that we are constantly trying to make sure are decriminalized, may also bring about additional resources as we work with behavioral health as well. So there's a lot of opportunities moving forward, and I like the fact that the chairman, the oversight on this particular bill, Senator San Nicolas, made the implications as well that we'll be working going into the next fiscal year to ensure that those relationships exist and we build capacity. So I think there's a lot of room, and I think this appropriation is very appropriate given the circumstances, but also comes along with putting together the needed work to be done to ensure that we can make them more sustainable, Mr. Speaker. But we want to acknowledge the work that they do. One only has to go up there like you do consistently to see what kind of work is going on. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to once again rise in full support of this bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Duenas. any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? If not, Senator Nicholas, on the motion to send the bill down to the voting file. Any objection? The next bill to be heard will be the Speaker's bill on 266.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can you hear me? Stop.
I'm not sure if your mic is on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to place Bill 266-32 COR on the third reading file, and I'd just like to briefly give a background information.
Any objection? Seeing or hearing none.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think everyone has heard, and because there's been a discussion for many years about the Tijan Parkway and the need, of course, to have this new highway that will connect now the drivers from, Marine Corps Drive to, of course, Mighty. What's really saddening, of course, to me, and I read, the press release that was put out, that yes, there was a crisis that was averted, and that there was federal monies, of course, that were approved for the runway project, but because of a lack of any movement, it stood to be lost. And it's so unfortunate because actually Senator Tom Ada, had actually had a meeting, and I was present in that meeting when we met with their attorney, Mr. Clark, about the importance of moving, this forward. And since, of course, at that time, it passed, and we had Public Law 32-4041, and the authors of this bill, besides myself, is Senator Ada, Munya Barnes, Respicio, and even Chris Duenas and Tony Ada, were all part of this legislation, which is Public Law 32-41. So that then, of course, in the language, actually listed the acquisition of the property for what we're going to call now the Tijan Parkway project. And what Bill 266 then would do is actually then rename that Tijan Parkway now to Chalan Magahaga. And I'd like to thank, of course, my colleagues, Senator Tina Munya Barnes and Senator Aline Yamashita, the three women of the legislature who are primary sponsors of this bill. Chamorro women have always held powerful roles in their families and in our society. And the most powerful woman in ancient Chamorro society was the Magahaga, or the firstborn daughter of the highest ranking person in a clan. Clans were governed equally by a Magahaga and a Magalahi, which is the firstborn son. When decisions were made, the Magahaga always had the final say. Unfortunately, this power was not respected by Europeans, who wrote the first accounts of Chamorro history and purposely left out the names of women. They were critical of the roles women played in ancient Chamorro society, noting that women held power reserved only for men in the rest of the world. Although Chamorro women are largely unnamed throughout written history, the sacrifices they made to keep the culture alive have not gone unnoticed. Since Chamorro culture is matrilineal and family lines are traced through mothers, many scholars attribute the survival of the culture to women. People's identity and place in society were determined by who their mothers were. Thus, women shaped the destiny of their children and ultimately of future generations of Chamorros. They also educated younger Chamorros about their genealogy, ensuring that they would always understand their connections to those around them, to their land, and to the history of their clan. So just as Tijan is at the center of the island, the Magahaga is a central figure in our society. Naming the Tijan Parkway in honor of our island's powerful women gives tribute to the important roles women have assumed throughout Guam's history and today. They carry life in their wombs, nurture their children, and lead their families on our island with respect and dignity. So thus, with this Bill 266, the Tijan Parkway that's located on the Tijan Plateau in the central part of Guam, bordering the municipalities of Barragata, Maite, and Tamuning, shall hereinafter then be known as Magahaga from its junction with Route 8 from the Purple Heart Memorial Highway to its junction with Route 10A. And with this, we're designating the Department of Public Works to post signs along the Magahaga at appropriate intervals that visibly then would identify the roadway's official name. And I ask our colleagues to please support this piece of legislation, Bill 266, in honor of the women of our culture, of the Chamorro culture, and the women in their lives as well. And lastly, because at the time when I was asking our colleagues for support in the placement of this bill on the agenda, I'd like to request that Senator Tom Ada be listed as one of the co-sponsors.
On that amendment, hearing no objection.
Thank you very much.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator Yamashita, followed by Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on Bill number 266-32, of which I stand in full support with a sense of honor. Mr. Speaker, all of us who are paying attention, most certainly I know that you do, as does Speaker Wampat. Today's world, today's life issues, today the challenges that the nation and Guam face can be incredibly overwhelming. And as Madam Speaker gave us a brief history of Magahaga and the place of the firstborn and the place of women in our society, I suggest that more than ever we really need to cultivate that whole value. We're challenged right now on our island in how to salvage the fraying social fabric, the issues that cause our hearts to pause, and the issues that bring tears to us when we read the unfortunate news, when we read the people who are arrested, who are indicted, who are sentenced. And today we read another person who's going to go away for a long time for doing incredible wrong. As Madam Speaker described the Tijan Parkway and about how it connects all various routes of our island, it really makes sense to me, as this is a real symbolic gesture, for us to say that we need to strengthen, really revisit the value of what a mom, a grandmother, an aunt, a woman does to balance, to temper, to nudge forward where we need to go. And while Magahaga stands for authority, it really also stands for responsibility. And we all have a responsibility to ensure that family values are there, that we respect, that the males and the females get along and respect each other for what we can contribute to addressing all that is in front of us. As while it can be a time of despair, it's also a grand opportunity to come together for things like this and other issues that we just discussed on the floor to resolve these issues. If our children at risk need help, we will find a way. We will find a way. If our mayors need help to better their programming services, their parks and recreational efforts, we will find a way. And hopefully soon enough in the next term, not the next term, but hopefully the next session, we will discuss early childhood in a real constructive manner so that we will find a way. And so it's with this, Mr. Speaker, that I stand in full support of renaming the Tijan Parkway. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Madam Speaker, you're welcome to close. On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file. Mr. Majority Leader, do you have a motion?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wait.
On Bill number 222-32, on behalf of Speaker Pangilinan, I recognize Senator Frank Ogden.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we do know the reason for the absence of Speaker Ben Pangilinan. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to move for the placement of Bill number 222-32 COR as amended by the Committee on Appropriations, Public Debt, Legal Affairs, Retirement, Public Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, and Land to be placed on third reading.
Yes, Senator, you're going to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is an act relative to the Crimes Against Minors and Sex Offender Registry. And just to highlight a couple of the provisions that have been amended through this particular registry, Madam Speaker, on page 4, section 3, it highlights the definition of any juvenile sex offender who meets the definition under a particular code of this act shall be required to follow all registration requirements under this act, and all other SORNA sexual registration requirements shall apply, including public website disclosure in the sex offender registry. To continue on that added provision, Madam Speaker, it says it highlights exemption permitted. The only exception made for this section is that juvenile sex offenders who are adjudicated in the family court and who meet the definition shall be exempted from the public website disclosure and shall be placed on a private, non-public database wherein such registration information will only be made available to the National Sex Offender Registry to be placed in the National Non-Public Database of Sex Offender Information to law enforcement and supervision agencies and to registration authorities in other jurisdictions. Madam Speaker, that provision speaks highly of individuals or highlights individuals who are adjudicated through the family court process. Individuals who do not meet the definition by virtue of going through the court process of being an adult. And it would keep that person's name on this registry in a private, non-public database specifically so that other law enforcement entities can acquire it only because it is a function of that particular sexual registry rather than making it publicly accessible. So, Madam Speaker, I think that's one of the major provisions that is contained in this amendment that the committee had highlighted. And again, on page 7, section 8, it further identifies that these individuals who are adjudicated through this process shall be required on the private, non-public database for a lifetime. And, Madam Speaker, it's ensuring that these young youth members who are convicted through the family court process, that in fact they be part of the private, non-public disclosure component of the sexual registry for informational purposes for law enforcement nationwide, but that their youth or their age be taken into consideration in terms of providing it as part of the public disclosure registry component. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to stand on behalf of Speaker Ben Pangilinan and not only endorse this legislation, but recognize that our youth who go through this process, that really their privacy should be maintained, but it should continue to be accessible by law enforcement, not only in Guam, but nationwide, and that part should be respected. So, Madam Speaker, I ask for the support of our colleagues so that this legislation that was endorsed by the Attorney General's office and by our law enforcement partners in the community, that this be recognized and that it be added as an additional provision within the public law for sexual registry. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Tony Ada, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if the author can yield to a question on page
Senator,
4, line 11.
You yield, but please proceed
4,
with
line
your
11.
question.
probably we can just define the SORNA. It's not, I was looking through, and it's not,
It's the Sexual Offender Registry. That's what SORNA stands for, Madam Speaker. It's in the entire code. I apologize if I don't have it readily available, but it's the Sexual Offender Registry, the NA component I need to identify. But that's what it's in reference to.
thank you, Madam Speaker, but probably maybe we'll
I know that
have a definition for it.
SOR is a sex offender registry. If you like, I'll take a brief recess and we get it for you. We're going to take a brief recess. The legislature is back in session, and SORNA is Sexual Offender Registry Notification Act, and we could have legal counsel state, say what it is, and then parentheses SORNA, SORNA. Is that okay with you, Senator?
thank you, Madam Speaker. Noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, then. On the motion, is there... Well, that's a technical. Okay, to SORNA being described, say what it is. No objection, so ordered. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on the motion? There being none, so on the motion then to send 222-32 COR to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Senator Respicio, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we revert back to motions.
On that motion without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and colleagues, we have a bill 289 introduced by Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz, an act to amend subsection 5121E of Part C, Article 2, Chapter 5, Title 5 of GCA, relative to permitting alternative dispute resolution in contracts approved by the Government of Guam Retirement Fund, and that the Vice Speaker has issued a committee report. And at this time, I move that Bill 289-32 COR and the version introduced by the sponsor be placed on the second reading file.
On that motion without any objections, so ordered. Thank you,
Madam
Senator.
Speaker.
On the Bill 289-32, Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move Bill 289-32 to the third reading file and ask for an opportunity to speak.
May proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. First, I want to thank you and the Chairman of Rules for your indulgence in allowing me to take this off and on. In my haste last week, I neglected to carefully read the committee report, and there were pages that were not supposed to be in the committee report that were in the committee report. And so I asked that it be pulled off and be sent back to committee. I have since received notification by email from legal counsel from the retirement fund that it's imperative that we act on this bill as soon as possible. This is a very, very simple bill. It's actually all of one paragraph amendment, which allows the retirement fund to enter into contracts with professionals, either fund managers or actuaries, and in those contracts to allow for dispute resolution by alternative dispute resolution, mediation, or arbitration. It's specific only, and I want to repeat that, this authority is not amending any other part of the procurement law. It's only amending the authority of the retirement fund to enter into contracts with their professionals to allow for alternative dispute resolution, arbitration, and mediation so that when they have disputes, we don't have to run through four-year, five-year litigation, that we can bring in an expert on retirement and fund managers and actuaries and somehow work out a resolution at the earliest possible date. I wanted to also make mention that we received from the chairman of the board, Speaker Joe T. Augustine, support for this legislation. At the hearing, the administrator, Ms. Bloss, their legal counsel, Ms. Grimes, and Mr. Camacho all appeared and explained the reason for this, and that wanted to make sure that all the senators understood there has not and never has been a suit brought against any of the fund managers at the retirement fund, but it is in not so much in anticipation, but in the event that it does happen, they wanted to be able to resolve it as quickly as possible without running up huge legal bills to resolve the issues. There has not been a problem in the past. They just want to have this authority to do it and put it into their contracts, which are going to be negotiated in the next couple of months, which was the reason why their legal counsel wrote to me this morning asking that I make my best efforts to try to get it back on the agenda today. And I want to thank the minority members who have been very gracious about not objecting to this coming back on the floor, and hoping that we can get this bill through as soon as possible. And in recognition of the fact that he's been my contact on the other side to move this through I'd like to ask Senator Chris Duenas be named as a second co-sponsor on this bill for his efforts to assist the retirement fund in getting this done expeditiously.
On the motion, no objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I ask for the support from all of the colleagues. This is something to protect our retirement fund from having to run up excessive legal bills, and more importantly, to be able to have that money go to your annuities rather than paying lawyers. So I hope that I can get the support of all the colleagues. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
On the motion then to send 289-32 COR to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. That's it. We've exhausted every bill that's on the second reading file. Senator Respicio, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there being no other business in the second reading file, I move that we recess till 10:30 tomorrow morning, and that we give the time necessary to the clerk, her staff, and the legal counsels to prepare the engrossed versions of these bills. So I move that we recess till 10:30 tomorrow morning.
The motion is to recess until 10:30 tomorrow morning. No objections, so ordered. We are in recess.